Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. The deal was supposed to end everything. Times of blood, treason, and buried secrets were meant to evaporate behind a single hand. But the moment Matt stepped into the dimly lit Newman Enterprises boardroom, the air shifted with an implied trouble that no contract could abolish. Victor Newman stood at the head of the table like a king guarding his throne. Jack Abbott sat stiffly to his right, pretending confidence while his eyes betrayed deep query. And Matt, calm and nearly disturbingly relaxed, closed the heavy door behind him, the echo of it slamming shut sounding like a warning bell for the storm about to erupt. Flyers lay open, legal documents scattered, and the so-called peace agreement between Newman and Abbott was moments down from being perfected. Yet Matt had come not to subscribe but to destroy, and the faint boo on his lips said everything. "Before we do," he said vocally, his voice slicing through the pressure like a blade, "I suppose it's only fair that the verity be laid out." Victor's eyes narrowed, Jack shifted uncomfortably, and the room felt suddenly lower, like the walls were closing in. "Let's not waste time, Matt," Victor growled. "This deal ends moment." But Matt chortled, shaking his head. "No, Victor, moment it begins." And with that single judgment, the first crack appeared in the fragile armistice Jack tried to fit. "We're then to move forward, not relive the history." But Matt raised a cutlet, silencing him, his aspect locking onto Victor with a cold intensity. "The history is the reason none of you earn peace." And also he delivered the first of the three statements that would enkindle chaos. "Victor, the blood on your hands didn't start with business, it started with the fire." The room set, Jack's face went pale, Victor's jaw tensed. "You buried the verity about what really happened to that storehouse, and you let an innocent man take the fall," Jack rumored. "Duent," but Matt continued. "My father failed believing he was a felonious because you demanded a goat." Victor slammed his fist on the table. "That's a taradiddle." But the earthquake in his voice betrayed him. Jack stood shaking. "Matt, this isn't the time." And Matt turned to him sluggishly, eyes blazing. "Oh Jack, you of all people should know that time doesn't heal what was no way exposed." Victor's breathing grew heavy, but Matt wasn't finished. "That fire wasn't an accident, it was an order," Jack rumored. Victor snapped, "Enough." But the damage was done. The room buzzed with a verity no bone wanted to face, and Matt calmly moved to the alternate statement, his voice lowering to a dangerous tale. "Jack, you didn't just lose your company to Victor, you vended your soul to him." Jack's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Matt laughed plaintively. "You handed him the influence he demanded to crush my family in exchange for saving your precious Abbott name." Victor scowled. "Business is war." But Matt shot back. "No, Victor, this was prosecution," Jack stammered. "I had no choice," Matt leaned in. "You always have a choice, Jack, you just chose power over people." The word struck like a poke. Jack stumbled back into his president, guilt submerging his face. Victor crossed his arms, perplexed. "You're wasting our time." But Matt wasn't done tearing the room piecemeal. "The deal you're subscribing moment? It's erected on stolen plutocrat, stolen lives and stolen silence." Victor snarled. "You suppose you can hang me?" Matt smiled darkly. "I don't need to hang you, Victor the First, just need to remind you who you really are." Jack tried to calm the situation. "We can fix this." But Matt shook his head. "No, Jack, this ends with the verity." And also he delivered the third and final blow, the words that would turn pressure into violence. "Victor Newman, your conglomerate was erected on the bodies of people you offered, including my family." The air was smelled from the room, Jack rumored. "What did you say?" Matt's voice cracked for the first time. "You destroyed her life, you silenced her, and when she tried to expose you, you cancelled her." Victor's eyes flashed with rage. "Watch your mouth." But Matt continued. "You didn't just ruin her, you killed her spirit." Jack stood shaking. "This is insane." Matt slammed his hand on the table. "What's insane is letting monsters pretend to be icons." Victor's restraint snapped, his fist gripped. His face darkened with fury. "You don't get to speak about my family, my heritage, or my power." Matt stepped closer, intrepid. "Your heritage is destruction." And that was when Victor Newman lost control. In a flash of pure rage, he dived across the table and punched Jack square in the face. The crack of bone echoed through the room. Jack collapsed to the bottom, blood discovering from his lip. Stunned gasps filled the air. Security rushed by, but Victor stood over Jack, casket heaving, eyes burning. "This is what happens when you betray me," Matt goggled, unyielding. "No, Victor, this is what happens when the verity eventually hits you," Jack moaned, clinging his jaw. "Victor, you did this." Victor turned down, shaking with rage. "He merited it." The deal lay forgotten, the papers scattered like shattered pledges, and Matt still picked up his fleece. "The war isn't over," he said calmly. "It's just getting honest," as he walked out, leaving before broken alliances, a bleeding Abbott and a Newman conglomerate on the point of collapse, because in Genoa City, the most dangerous armament isn't power, it's the verity. The silence after Victor's punch was heavier than the sound of the impact itself, a suffocating, paralyzing quiet that wrapped around the Newman Enterprises boardroom like a burial cloak, broken only by Jack's shallow breathing and the faint hum of the megacity beyond the glass walls. Blood dropped from Jack's lip onto the polished bottom, each sanguine drop a memorial that the fragile peace Victor had claimed to cover was nothing further than a violent vision. And for the first time in times, the potent Victor Newman stood exposed, not as a strategic architect, not as an untouchable mogul, but as a man whose fury had eventually slipped its leash, while Matt remained eerily calm, watching the chaos unfold with eyes that reflected neither fear nor satisfaction, only grim resoluteness, as security dithered at the doorway, doubtful whether to intermediate or retreat from the storm of power, history, and destruction that had just erupted. Jack sluggishly pushed himself up from the bottom, his hand pulsing as he wiped the blood from his mouth, his eyes burning not just with pain but with the ruinous consummation that the man he'd formerly called a rival, an adversary, and indeed a reticent supporter had crossed a line that could no way be uncrossed. You didn't have to do that," Jack rasped. His voice cracked with unbelief, but Victor's silence was louder than any concession, his jaw gripped, his fists still tight, as if the violence hadn't yet completely left his body, and in that charged moment Matt eventually spoke, his voice calm yet slice. "You see, Jack, this is what power looks like when it's cornered." And the verity of those words settled heavily on everyone in the room, because Victor Newman wasn't a man who replied, he calculated, he manipulated, he controlled, and for him to strike without strategy meant one intimidating thing: the verity had wounded him deeper than any adversary ever could. Jack uncurled his suit with shaking hands, his pride bruised just as poorly as his face. "You suppose you've won, Matt," he murmured, though indeed he didn't believe the words, because winning in Genoa City was no way clean, no way simple, and no way without a ruinous cost. Victor eventually turned toward him, his eyes blazing. "You chose the wrong side," he growled, the familiar voice of authority returning, but commodity in his tone was fractured, unsteady, as if the foundation of his conglomerate had cracked beneath his basis, and Matt seized that weakness without mercy. "No, Victor, the wrong side was always yours," he replied, stepping near to the table where the unsigned deal still lay like a cadaver staying to be buried. "This agreement was supposed to abolish your sins, but you can't negotiate with the history," Victor scarfed. "You suppose your allegations change anything?" Matt's aspect hardened. "They formerly have." Because outside that room, rumors were spreading like campfire, whispers of violence, treason, and secrets too dangerous to stay retired. And in Genoa City, verity was an armament sharper than any blade. Jack sank into a precedent, his body paining but his mind racing, because Matt's exposures had torn open injuries Jack had spent decades trying to bury, recollections of deals made in despair, alliances forged in fear, and compromises that had cost innocent lives. "You dragged me into your war," Jack said plaintively, looking at Victor, "and now I'm paying the price." Victor's lips coiled into a familiar boo, but it demanded its usual confidence. "You always knew the rules," and Matt laughed darkly. "There are no rules when monsters write the contracts." The pressure in the room thickened, and it came sorrowfully clear that the deal wasn't just dead, it had been executed. And with it, any stopgap of peace between Newman and Abbott was shattered beyond form. Meanwhile, across Genoa City, the fallout was formally unfolding, because secrets no way stayed locked down for long, especially when they were soaked in blood, and in a quiet corner of crimson lights, whispers began circulating among the megacity's most influential numbers. "Victor punched Jack," one voice muttered. "In the boardroom," another added. Matt exposed everything. The rumors moved briskly, then verity, ringing, growing, evolving, and by the time the news reached the cognizance of Nicky Newman, it felt like the ground had faded beneath her bases. "He did what?" she rumored, clinging her phone, her heart pounding with a blend of fear and fury, because she knew Victor better than anyone. His rage, his pride, and the dangerous way he replied when his heritage was hovered, and this time, it wasn't just business on the line, it was his entire conglomerate, his family, and his future. Back at Newman Enterprises, Victor dismissed security with a sharp gesture, his authority still unquestioned despite the chaos. "Leave us," he commanded, and reluctantly the guards adhered, leaving before 3 men bound by treason, violence, and a history soaked in blood. Jack exhaled sluggishly. "This ends now," he said, but his words demanded conviction. Because he knew nothing truly ended in Genoa City, it only converted into commodity more dangerous. And Matt jounced. "It ends when the verity is paid for." Victor laughed coldly. "You want payment? You'll get consequences." But for the first time, his pitfalls felt concave, like echoes of a power that was beginning to crack. Matt leaned against the table, his eyes no way leaving Victor. "You took everything from my family," he said still. "Their names, their future, their quality." Jack looked down, guilt written across his face because he'd helped, whether through action or silence, and Victor crossed his arms. "Your family made choices," Matt snapped. "You made them vanish." The air grew thick with implied allegations, and Victor's mask eventually slipped, just for a moment. "You suppose I erected this conglomerate by playing fair?" he barked. "The world rewards the ruthless." Matt's voice was steady. "No, Victor, the world just hasn't penalized you yet." Outside, the megacity lights flitted like advising signs, reflecting the insecurity growing within Newman Enterprises, and as Victor stormed out of the boardroom, leaving Jack and Matt before, it came clear that the real war was only beginning, because Victor Newman no way lost without striking back harder, and the violence in that room was just the first move in a far more dangerous game. Jack drooped in his president, his body exhausted, his soul indeed more so. "You wanted vengeance," he said to Matt. "Congratulations." Matt shook his head sluggishly. "This isn't vengeance," he replied. "It's justice." But justice in Genoa City was no way clean, no way fair, and no way without blood, and Jack knew that by allowing Matt to expose Victor, he'd unleashed a storm that would destroy far further than it healed. "You've made adversaries," Jack advised. "Important bones." Matt's eyes burned with determination. "I've lived in the shadow of their power my entire life," he said. "Now they'll live in the shadow of the verity." As Matt walked out, leaving Jack alone with his fractured pride and broken alliances, the weight of what had just happened settled over Genoa City like a dark pall. Because Victor Newman would not forgive, he'd not forget, and he'd not surrender. And the punch he threw at Jack was only the morning of a brutal retribution that would shake the megacity to its core. At the Newman estate, Nikki brazened Victor the moment he arrived, her voice pulsing with wrathfulness and fear. "You assaulted Jack Abbott," she said, her eyes searching his face for answers, but Victor's silence was all the evidence she demanded. "You've crossed a line," she rumored. "You've crossed numerous lines." Victor turned down, his shoulders tense. "He merited it." Nikki shook her head, gashes forming. "You're destroying everything." But Victor's conglomerate had always been erected on destruction, and he was too deep in his own heritage to see the remains he left before. Away, whispers reached Phyllis, Lily, and Devon, each response fueling the campfire of gossip, enterprise, and fear. Because when Victor Newman lost control, Genoa City no way remained untouched, and the verity Matt had unleashed hovered to unravel decades of precisely constructed falsehoods. And also came the warning. A single envelope slipped under Matt's door that night, with no return address, no hand, just 3 words written in bold black essay. "You should stop." Matt goggled at the communication, his heart pounding because he knew exactly who had transferred it, and he also knew Victor Newman no way made idle pitfalls. And as the megacity slept, ignorant of the storm brewing beneath its spangling face, one verity came sorrowfully clear. The deal had failed, the violence had begun, and the war for Genoa City's soul was far from over. The warning on Matt's doorstep was only the beginning, because Victor Newman never whispered empty threats. He carved them into reality, and by the next morning Genoa City felt different, heavier, like the air itself was bracing for impact. While Matt stood at his apartment window watching the city wake up, fully aware that the storm he had unleashed was now racing toward him at full force, his phone buzzing with missed calls from unknown numbers, each one a silent reminder that powerful enemies didn't need to introduce themselves. And yet, despite the danger, Matt felt something he hadn't felt in years: control, because for the first time Victor Newman was reacting instead of ruling, and that shift in power was more dangerous than any punch thrown in a boardroom. Across town, Victor sat in the shadows of his study at the Newman ranch, the firelight reflecting off his hardened expression, his jaw tight with restrained fury as he reviewed the reports laid out before him: security footage, legal files, financial records, and names. So many names. Because Victor didn't just seek revenge, he engineered it. Matt thinks he's exposed me, Victor growled. But he's only exposed himself, and with a single phone call, the machinery of his empire roared to life. Investigators were dispatched, bank accounts scrutinized, alliances reactivated. Because Victor Newman didn't destroy his enemies with fists, he erased them with influence. Meanwhile, Jack Abbott sat in his office at Genoa, his face still bruised, his pride even more so, staring at the city skyline as if it held answers he no longer trusted, because Matt's words had cracked something deep inside him, forcing him to confront the cost of every deal he'd ever made with Victor, every secret he'd helped bury, and every life that had been quietly ruined along the way. This ends, Jack whispered to himself, but he knew it wouldn't. Not while Victor Newman still breathed. And not while Matt continued pushing truths that could burn the entire city to the ground. Back in his apartment, Matt finally answered one of the unknown calls, his voice steady despite the tension tightening his chest. "I'm listening." And a distorted voice responded, cold and calculated. "You've been very brave," the word dripping with sarcasm. "Bravery gets people buried." Matt clenched his fist. "Tell Victor I'm not afraid." The line went dead, but the message was clear. Victor had begun his counterattack. The first strike came silently. By noon, headlines were spreading across Genoa City. Matt under investigation for financial fraud. False allegations, frozen accounts, anonymous sources, and a carefully crafted narrative painting Matt not as a whistleblower, but as a criminal seeking revenge because Victor didn't just attack his enemies. He destroyed their credibility, and Matt watched in disbelief as his reputation was dismantled piece by piece. "This is how he fights," Matt muttered, realizing the battlefield had shifted from boardrooms to public perception. Jack tried to intervene, calling in favors, demanding explanations, but every door slammed shut, every connection mysteriously severed, because Victor Newman had reminded Genoa City who truly held the power, and Jack felt the crushing weight of his past decisions returning to haunt him. "I helped build this monster," he admitted, staring at his reflection, "and now it's coming for all of us." At the Newman ranch, Nikki confronted Victor again, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "You're ruining lives," she cried. "This isn't justice, it's cruelty." Victor turned toward her slowly, his eyes cold. "This is survival," he replied. "Matt challenged my legacy," Nikki whispered, "and now you're proving him right." But Victor didn't respond because he didn't need approval, only victory. As the day unfolded, Matt's world began to collapse, his credit cards declined, his lawyer refused to take his calls, and even old friends avoided him, afraid of being pulled into Victor's web of destruction. And for the first time, fear crept into Matt's resolve, because exposing the truth was one thing, surviving the fallout was another. Then came the second strike. A sealed envelope arrived at Genoa, addressed to Jack Abbott, containing documents so damning they made his blood run cold. Evidence linking him directly to the warehouse fire, forged signatures, falsified safety reports, and a paper trail that could destroy his legacy forever. And at the bottom of the file, a simple note. "Choose your side." Jack's hands trembled as he stared at the evidence, realizing Victor was forcing him into an impossible corner. Betray Matt and protect himself, or stand by the truth and lose everything. And for the first time in his life, Jack Abbott didn't know which choice he could survive. Meanwhile, Matt received a message of his own, a video file sent from an anonymous source, showing surveillance footage of his sister arguing with Victor years ago, her voice shaking as she threatened to expose him, and then the footage cut to black, leaving only silence behind. Matt collapsed onto the couch, his chest tightening as grief, rage, and guilt crashed over him all at once because now he knew, Victor hadn't just destroyed her career. He had destroyed her future. And that realization hardened something inside Matt that could never be softened again. "This isn't over," Matt whispered, his eyes burning with resolve. "You started this war, Victor, but I'll finish it." The third strike was the most brutal. Late that night, Matt's apartment door was kicked in, his belongings scattered, his files stolen, and his evidence wiped clean, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake, because Victor Newman didn't just attack people. He erased their resources, and standing in the ruins of his own home, Matt finally understood the depth of the enemy he had provoked. But instead of breaking, he smiled grimly because desperation breeds courage, and courage breeds rebellion. Jack, torn between fear and conscience, finally made his choice. He met Matt in a secluded parking garage, the city lights flickering above them like witnesses to their secret alliance. "Victor's coming for you," Jack warned. "He's coming for both of us." Matt nodded. "Let him." Jack hesitated, then handed Matt a flash drive. "This is everything," he said. "Every deal, every cover-up, every secret Victor forced me to keep." Matt stared at the drive, stunned. "Why are you doing this?" Jack's voice cracked. "Because I'm tired of being afraid." At the Newman ranch, Victor sensed the shift in the air, the unmistakable feeling of control slipping through his fingers, and for a man who had built his empire on dominance, that feeling was intolerable. "Find them," he ordered, his voice sharp with urgency, "and make this end." But Genoa City was no longer playing by Victor's rules. The truth was spreading, alliances were forming, and secrets once buried were clawing their way back to the surface. And as the city braced for the fallout, one thing became clear: Victor's revenge had begun, but so had the resistance. Because in Genoa City, power isn't eternal, and even empires can fall.